Welcome everybody to Facebook, to User's Guide to the Soul. So good to have you. And of course, whether you're part of Temple Israel or another synagogue or another city, please feel free to join those of us that are here in Zoom. It's an exciting class to be a part of, an exciting conversation. And just email maya@temple-israel.org to get the link to that. And today we're starting the second volume of the Tanya, which is a powerful book that's been studied for centuries to rev up your spiritual life, integrate your soul and your body, and really function at the highest level as a Jewish person living in a life. It's a beautiful, beautiful pathway. And we've learned, to catch us up, we've learned in chapters 1 to 8, a new lexicon, a whole lot of information about my soul and about how to identify the different parts of the soul, right? I'm trying to get on speaker view here. Here I go. How to identify the different parts of the soul, the fact that I actually have two souls flowing through me, a self-centered soul and an other-centered soul, how that soul has three garments. Each of them have three garments: thought, speech, and action. And even the 10 attributes that make up the anatomy of each of those two souls. So go back and you can watch all that information in the first several months that we were learning about what the structure is of my soul. Then we learned about how the souls interact and how we can manage that, and two types of meditation. One called the long short path, which is based on intellectual meditation to have mastery over one's emotional flow that's flowing through the heart. The second, the short long path, which is more about a quick system of meditation that uncovers a love and a fear that's already in my heart, and allowing that to flow and let me function optimally. When we say optimally, we mean as what's called a Bainani. Bainani is someone that, if you look at them, if you're on the bus next to them, you think you're sitting next to a tzaddik because they're doing everything right. Every word, every thought, every action is like a tzaddik. But on the inside, they're just like you and me. They're just, they're working with the Tanya and they're functioning at the same level as the tzaddik in terms of how their soul expresses, not the inner workings of their soul. And then we went through a whole series of chapters up until chapter 34, dealing with the very important topic of joy, because everything we learned previously works much better if we're in a state of joy. If we're excited and happy to wake up and get started, we're excited and happy to speak to those around us, to help them with any problems that come up. You know those kind of people, that things just work better when we're in a state of joy. And so the Alter Rebbe devoted a large section to getting anything out of the way that may hinder joy, and then showing us some meditations to actually amp up joy even when nothing's in the way, when we're just in a neutral situation, at a frame that is really fulfilling a big part of our purpose. And now we're going to segue to the next major section of the Tanya. Since we've now learned the complete technique, along with both systems of meditation and approaches to joy, and we've learned all the how, now we're going to segue to the why. The why. Why should I go ahead and do all this stuff, even if it sounds nice? I'll be joyful all the time. My soul will be serving its purpose. Being a Bainani, functioning at that level, not that I'm saying I am, obviously, that's a very high level, but being a Bainani, you can imagine, might be a somewhat frustrating existence, because here I am, always pushing myself to function in thought, speech, and action to be like a tzaddik, and I know how I can do it because I have the technique now and the meditations. But still, on the inside, I'm in turmoil and I'm always struggling. And I've learned, as we have in the past, that yes, that struggle has value. That struggle has tremendous value. But still, maybe there's some doubt. Maybe I get tired of that. Maybe after a year or 2 or 10 of that, I think, well, maybe it's better to just enjoy the brownies and the TV shows and not make such a big deal about being a Bainani. So now the Alter Rebbe transitions and gives this Bainani a worldview, a total philosophy that just chunks up in terms of its scope. And even if you're learning it just on its own, it really gives us a beautiful frame for that big question: why am I here? What's this about? Now, if you read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, life, the universe, and everything. What's the meaning of life, right? That big question. And you think it can never be answered, But I believe by the end of this section, you'll agree that Jewish mysticism has the perfect answer for what's the purpose of all this. And that can let us wake up and function as we're functioning with the system, really with a beautiful, beautiful wind at our back, because it all locks in and you feel like, I can share with you, Joe, you brought up Soul Cafe, and there's an employee at the Soul Cafe who's also a friend of mine. I won't mention his name, but they serve people with certain cognitive issues and help them work. And one of them who we've seen over the past few years working part-time. Hey man, how you doing, David? All right, I can mention his name. I found out, David, you're now like working there full-time, right? I believe I got the right info. And to me,
yes, you got the right info. He couldn't hear you because
time,
I have my
space, and
earbuds.
consciousness meeting. Like David makes such a good latte, and he's so friendly to every customer, and he's clearly like made to be doing the job he's doing. He's in the right place, and everything they did there with the gift that our rabbi arranged, etc. For me, it's all worth it for that one thing that we can go in there and know David's always there, working full time, making gorgeous coffees and making people smile. So to me, that's the state we want to aim for at every moment. Can every moment feel that right? Can we always have that sense of like, yes, this is why I'm here, this is why I'm doing it. If we can get the other Jewish things we're doing to feel like that beshert, then we're always going to be in a high functioning state. So that's why for us, or for a Bainan, we want this worldview. So everything becomes like the way I feel now when I see David behind the counter. It's just, yes, someone did something good, and this is just right. So let's get started. We're in chapter 35.
So, Cantor?
Yes.
Is it just a coincidence that the first paragraph of chapter 35, the beginning section, is in today's Torah portion? That's amazing.
So I hadn't tracked that yet. Thank you. I'm behind on my chitas, on my Torah study.
Yeah.
So I hadn't realized till now.
So, Noreen, there are no coincidences.
I know. It's amazing.
There you go. So beautiful. We're now in the parsha that this ki karov elecha hadavar meod bificha vavcha lasoto is actually from. So great timing to be starting this.
Yeah.
And we're going into that one word, la'asoto, to do it, right? And as we'll see, this worldview is centered around understanding not just why I should do mitzvahs to be joyful, which was the last two chapters, understanding the depth of a mitzvah leads us to be joyful, but now it's actually looking at the worldview of what a mitzvah really is and why there's something about physical action that's tied up with, in fact, the purpose of existence. It's not just a random arbitrary thing. It's a big reframe. It's a worldview, but this is an answer to what's the purpose of life, believe it or not. Starting v'hinei letosefet beor tevat lasoto. Yes, Suan, go ahead.
Let us elucidate still further the term that you may do it in the verse. For the matter is very near to you, in your mouth and in your heart, that you may do it. When, as mentioned, the climax of the verse is its emphasis on action.
And so we've already looked at that you may do it, right? The definition of this, the translation of this verse is, because the thing is very close to you, all this Torah, it's very close to you, in all three garments, right? In your heart, in your mouth, and to do it, right? So that's being a Beinoni, right? I can, all the things in my heart, which is thought in this case, everything in my mouth, speech, and to do it, action, will all correspond to the Torah. That'll make me a Beinoni. And this is very close to it. It's very accessible. There's a way to do it, and we've gone through the entire technique now. But there's a question here, that you may do it. And that's what the Alter Rebbe wants to go into, right? Why is it that of those three, he's going to now frame how important action is, and in fact, in Judaism in general, how important action is. One of the teachers I learned from to prepare is Tully Silberberg in New York, and he pointed out one day he was at a friend's house and he pulled a book off a shelf, not a Jewish book, and it's called The Great Religions of the World. And he just thought, I wonder what this, non-Jewish author is going to say about Judaism. He opened it up. And it said, the thing that distinguishes Judaism from every other religion, is that every other religion starts with a premise of principles you have to believe. And from that is drawn how you should behave. Judaism is the only religion that starts with a list of behaviors. And from that, you have to figure out what are your principles that you believe. And perhaps you're thinking, yeah, well, we have the 13 principles of faith for Maimonides, but that was 800 years ago that was developed. For over 2,000 years, Judaism existed with this list of you must do this, you must not do that, and no clear set of this is what you must believe. I mean, yes, you have to believe in one God, but beyond that, what are our principles how do we articulate that? That was debatable, right? So there's something about action in Judaism that is actually where we start from, that is actually core to what we're about, that's different than every other religion. And that's a big question. Why is it that action is so important? As we'll see, it's a unique thing. And it's already been explained a little. If you look back at chapter 17, where the Alter Rebbe said, even if you don't do something with total emotion, as long as you have bilvavcha la'asoto, as long as you have the emotions to do it, that's the factor. So we call it a tfuna emotion. I have a subtle emotion that gets me to act. And that action shows that subtle emotion is actually doing the work and elevating the mitzvah. It was a longer conversation, but that's one way to explain it, is that la'asoto refers to bilvavcha. Because otherwise, how can God command us to feel something? How can God say, you should have love and awe to do this, right? If I don't like, if I don't like Duran Duran, you can't force me to like Duran Duran. You can say, listen to it, but you can't say love it, right? So how can we command it to love? We can be commanded to love enough to get us to do it. The subtle love that gets us to do it. But that's not exactly a worldview. That's a kabbalistic dynamic, perhaps. But now we're going for a full worldview about what is this business with action, and why is that such a key, such a principle, such a core of Judaism all over. And we also looked at a little bit in chapter 4 when we learned about the garments of the soul. And we learned that even though the garments of the divine soul are external, because they're completely one with God, they actually elevate the soul, if you remember, beyond the soul's own level. So when we're speaking words of Torah, because we're getting united with Torah, which is God's chokhmah, that external garment of my divine soul is able to elevate my soul above its own level. But even that leaves us with a few questions that the Alter Rebbe is going to go into and is going to go deeper into.
Let us also understand, in a very small measure, the purpose in creating Beinonim, to be and remain forever on the level of Beinonim. For as explained in chapter 14, the souls of the Beinonim are usually incapable of rising to the level of tzaddik through their own will and effort. They were created to be Beinonim.
And by the way, if you're with us on Facebook, feel free. I see there's a few people watching on Facebook too. Feel free to make comments. I'm keeping an eye on that, and we can include your comments in the class. If you're not sure, just comment right here. You can see that. So welcome to our extra students on Facebook. Good to have you. Second question: why did God create these Beinonim? Why do I have to be a Beinoni? Now, we got answers. We studied that the work of a Beinoni is really lofty and the struggle they have has value. But really, why do I have to struggle with myself? Why the system? Why couldn't I just be like Adam and Eve originally that were struggling with a snake? Why do I have to be like Adam and Eve after they took that bite and now the dichotomy was in them and they're struggling against themselves? That seems unfair. And am I really going to go through my whole life satisfied that as a Beinoni, I'm going to always push myself to be 100% in thought, speech, and action, when inside there's turmoil. I'm always struggling and I can't resolve it. And maybe there's a purpose to that for 10 years and then I work through it and I become a tzaddik. But really for my whole life, I was created to be that way. That's the only thing I can be. That's my limit. I was designed with that flaw, baked in, and there's no way I can get around it. Is that really going to be good enough for me for a whole life of growth and of purpose? So here we're going deeper also into that question of not only why is action so supreme, but also why are there so many people that seem unable to rise to the level where they just want to do the right thing all the time, right? What's that about? So that's all going to be incorporated into this worldview. Ridat nishmotehem la'olam hazeh להתלבש בנפש הבעמית שמהקליפה וסitra achra.
Also, the purpose of their soul's descent to this world, being clothed within the animal soul deriving from the klipa and the sitra achra, the very antithesis of the divine soul.
And there, I think the key is being clothed in, right? Lehit labesh. As we said, if I had to come down in the world and struggle with negativity around me, okay, sometimes I'll win, sometimes I'll lose, but I know who I am. I'm doing the right thing. I'm working and there's progress and I can find purpose in that. But for my divine soul to have to now be enclosed in an animal soul, and it can't do anything unless it convinces the animal soul to go ahead and help out, and to be so limited and to always be struggling with these two identities, really, that's the answer. That's my whole thing. That's the purpose of existence. That raises some questions, I think, as you're trying to pursue this path over years. So that's why this comes in as backup, call it. מאחר שלא יוכלו לשלחה כל ימיהם לדיחותה ממקומה מחלל השמאלי שבלב.
Since they will not be able to banish the animal soul throughout their lives, nor even dislodge it from its place in the left part of the heart.
As we've learned, a Beinoni is not going to be able to transform the emotions of their soul, the inner workings of the soul like a tzaddik. They'll always have the same urges as a regular person. So how do we live with that for a whole life? שלא יעלו ממנו הרהורים אל המוח.
So that no evil imagings rise from it to the brain.
As we've learned, even a Beinoni is going to have whatever silly ideas pop up into their brain from their heart. כי מהותה ועצמותה של נפש הבעמית שמהקליפה היא בתוקפה וויגורתה אצלם כתולדתה.
Inasmuch as the Beinonim, the essence of the animal soul derived from the Klipa, remains in its full strength and potency as at birth.
And this is also a review, if you've been with us, that a Beinoni, this intermediate state person, their inside is like yours and mine, and their self-centered soul is as strong as it was the day they were born, and they just went, wah, every time they needed something, right? You got that going on inside, and yet your mind controls your heart, and thought, speech, and action is 100%.
Cantor,
Yes.
does this have to do with free will?
No, the answer is giving has to do with the depth and meaning of action and mitzvahs. I mean, of course, if you didn't have free will and you weren't choosing to do mitzvahs, then they wouldn't have any meaning. So,
That's right.
Without free will, now it goes away. But it's not, the focus is not on free will here. That comes later when we're looking at kavanah, when we're looking at the intent behind the mitzvah, which is, I've using my little map of the timing here for that, right? That is chapters 41. Well, actually more 38 to 40. We're going to get into that.
Yeah, but if there's no
This is-
struggle, then there's no free. You have to have the free will to resolve the struggles.
Yeah. So you're right. Everything depends on free will. If we didn't have free will, none of this matters.
Right.
It's not really anything as a mitzvah either, right? So, but yeah, but the focus is not so much on free will as you'll see. Great. As at birth, is that where we are? Yeah. רק שלבושיה אינם מתלבשים בגופה כנזכר לאל. Except?
Except that its garments, i.e. its forms of expression as evil thought, speech, and action, do not clothe themselves in their body, as mentioned above in chapter 12, where the Alter Rebbe explains that by means of constant battle with his animal soul, the Benoni prevents the budding evil of the soul from expressing itself in his thought, speech, and action.
Right, so you see the question he's asking. He's sensitive. If this were, as we said way back when, a yechidus, a one-on-one meeting with this great teacher, with the Alter Rebbe, then by now we've learned this whole technique. We're functioning as a Beinoni, but we come in with the complaint. Really? That's it now? Just do that for the rest of my life and struggle for the rest of my life? But why? And this is the answer to why, right? Yeah, I know it's hard. I know that you're not going to overcome this. I've said, it's good work to do it, but now we need to know why, so we feel at peace and we feel there's a sense of meaning and joy in everything we do. Yes.
I mean, people, although they may not achieve the level of tzaddik, I mean, they're always striving to improve themselves,
Yes, and that's...
So they're not staying stagnant at one level.
I would agree. That's a good answer, is that even a Beinoni, while once they've hit Beinoni, they're always 100% in thought, speech, and action. But then we have the work of getting my insides to match my outsides, and that's a lifetime of work of refining myself. And you can get to be, a Beinoni at this level, or Beinoni at this level, or Beinoni at this level that's almost, matched. And there's progress there. But, there's still struggle at whatever level I'm at. There's still me fighting with me, right? And can we really, is it possible to end that? And the Alter Rebbe said, for you, no. For Beinoni, if you're created to be a Beinoni, it's not possible to end that. You can grow and you can lessen it. You can improve yourself, but that'll always be your work. You're never going to graduate to the work of a tzaddik. And, probably for these Hasidim that where this was their purpose, not they weren't into being a professional. They weren't into earning money. They weren't into, social standing. They just wanted to be a tzaddik. That was the work, right? And that could be a real letdown if now you're stuck, just trying to grow as a Beinoni. So some people call this chapter the solace for the Beinoni. This is like something that makes the Beinoni, feel at peace and that there's purpose and meaning to everything they're doing, even if it's many years. V'im ken, lama ze yordu nishmotehem la'olam hazeh, liga larik chas v'shalom lehilachem kol yimehem im hayetzer v'lo yachlu lo.
Why then did their souls descend to this world to strive in vain, God forbid, waging war all their lives against their evil inclination, yet never being able to vanquish it?
Right. And as we're reading this, let me point out that for a typical, working Russia like myself, that this is also very, very a beautiful worldview that helps with the question of why can't I be a Beinoni even, right? Why, even though I'm working at this for years, I still have these failings and these weaknesses. And so the same worldview applies to us as well, who are not at the level of a Beinoni. Utihizo nachamatam, lenachama b'chiflaim, letushia ulesameach libam b'Hashem, hashochin itam b'toch toratam v'avodatam. Doreen, do you want to unmute yourself for us?
Let this forthcoming explanation be their solace, to comfort them in double measure of aid, to gladden their hearts in God, who dwells among them in their Torah and divine service. That is, the explanation will show them how to find comfort and joy in the godly light that abides within them when they study the Torah and when they engage in the service of God.
Yeah, and Doreen with a D, why don't you do the next one? But this touches on the essence of this chapter, which is there's something called godly light, which we've learned about. The Ein Sof has an or, a light that comes from the infinite. And there's something called the dwelling of that light, or the dwelling of the Shekhinah, or the dwelling of godliness on something. And we're going to understand how that's tied up with mitzvahs in a particular way that will just add fuel to everything we're doing. And we're going to get a beautiful meditation in this chapter about, spoiler alert, it's coming in a few pages, about, next page, about a wick, a flame in oil that the Alter Rebbe is going to weave through the rest of the Tanya and actually finish the Tanya with this image again. That's a beautiful focus that we can bring into our meditations, and that will enlighten this worldview that's coming. Behu behakdim lashon hayanuka bazor parshat balak al pasuk hechacham enav birosho. Doreen, why don't you do this one?
The aforementioned difficulties will be resolved by clarifying first the comment of the Yanuka quoted in the Zohar, Parshat Balak, on the verse, "The wise man's eyes are in his head."
And the wise man's eyes are in his head. And I don't know. There's a few of us that have learned the Tanya, you know, Cindy and Rick. I get a thrill of joy every time I get to this Yanuka piece. It's like, such a pleasure that I got from this image and this meditation. There's good stuff coming. But let's explain who is the Yanuka, and for anyone on Facebook, what's the Zohar? The Zohar is the most perhaps mystical book of Judaism. If you think of Jewish mysticism, you think of the Zohar, this big tome that's supposed to be commentary on the Torah, but really is an illumination of Jewish mysticism. There's this very, very bizarre character in the Zohar called the Yanuka, who is a very young boy that was born a very, very gifted, outlandishly gifted Torah scholar and mystic. And to give you a sense, there's a tradition that before you're born, you learn all of the Torah while you're in your mother's womb. And then as you're being born, an angel presses here below your nose and you forget it all. And then you spend, it's this? You picture it this way, Joey? I pictured it this way, but yeah, that's nice too. So an angel presses there. That's why you have this spot. And now you spend the rest of your life learning the Torah. So this Yanuka came out without that spot. So maybe the angel was busy that moment, but the Yanuka came out not having forgotten anything and being completely in touch with the entire Torah and the mystical side of the Torah. And so the Yanuka starts talking, and all these sages of the day go, whoa, what's this kid talking about? This is like beyond anyone else's knowledge or insight. The Yanuka is this very mysterious character that brings us highly, highly mystical insights. And one thing the Yanuka said was from Ecclesiastes, the wise man's eyes are in his head. And the Alter Rebbe is going to ask, really? That's it? The wise man's eyes are in his head? Where are your eyes located? You know, there's 14 of us right here. Every one of us has their eyes in their head. So what does that mean? The wise man's eyes are in his head. But this is the starting point for our new whole section of the Tanya. V'chi be'an ata inoi devar nashkulu. Ela krahache hu vadai. Paula, why don't you go ahead, if you can unmute.
A man must not go 4 cubits while bareheaded. Why? Because the Shekinah, the divine presence, rests upon his head.
I think it was the Zohar comments, where else are wise men's eyes? Surely then the meaning of the verse is as follows. And then what you read, Titnan lo yahach barnash b'giluya dresha arba amot mai tamad ishchinta shaya al reshe. We've learned that a man must not go about 4 cubits while bareheaded. Why? Because the Shekinah rests on his or her head. The Shekinah rests on his head. So it's not that literally a wise man's eyes are in his head, of course. It means that there's a teaching, by the way, it's right in the Gemara. It says, why do we always wear these head coverings? Why shouldn't you walk 4 cubits without a head covering? Because above my head, the Shekinah rests, which is the light of God, God's presence. So there's this thing above my head, and I'm covering my head to remind myself that my whole reality, every thought, every speech, every action, it's bringing down potentially this presence of God, this light of the Shekinah. And that's what it means, where are wise man's eyes? They're watching above my head to make sure, how am I doing? Am I just telling jokes because I want to be funny and now the Shekhinah is kind of extinguished? Or am I telling jokes to bring people together to have a moment of meaning and now the Shekhinah is there? Am I using my actions and my thought to help my friends and my family now the Shekhinah is here? Or am I just, in it for myself and now the Shekhinah is gone? Every time I express myself, a wise man is looking at what is it on my head and how am I affecting that light of the Shekhinah? So much so that I can't even walk 6 feet without covering my head because I'm so aware there's this divine presence that as a Jew is resting above each of our heads. Make sense? Therefore, v'chol chacham enohi umiloi b'reshe inun b'hu desharya v'kaima al reshe.
Therefore, every wise man has his eyes, that is, his interest and concern, and hence all his speech concentrated in his head. That is, in that light of the Shekinah which rests and abides above his head.
Yeah, so that's the focus of a wise person is, according to the Yanuka, is that I want to be focused on this flame, this light, this something that is potentially hovering over my head. And if my eyes are there, if my focus, my concentration, my inner vision, the eyes of my mind are there, that's the sign of a wise person.
Now when his eyes, i.e. his interest, his concerns are there, he must know that the light kindled above his head, i.e. example, the light that shines upon his soul requires oil.
Right, so there's 2 ways to light oil. I call a lamp, call it, or a flame. When we say nair, we think of a candle like a birthday candle, right, which is hard wax. But did you hear someone was applying for a government thing? They said, when's your birthday? They said, July 10th. What year? Every year. Nobody laughed. It was quiet, but there you go. So you can do a candle, but you can also do oil in a lamp, which is oil with a wick and then a flame is over it. And we're talking about that. We're talking about a lamp with oil in it. And what happens if that oil runs out in the lamp? What happens to the flame? Goes out, right? So the flame above my head, I should know that it needs oil. And here we get to the actual metaphor that we're going to be using for this meditation. This is one you want to, jot down if you're taking notes. Begin degufa devar nash yihu tila unohora adlik le'ela.
For man's body is the wick that retains the luminous flame, and the light is kindled above it.
So for this metaphor, there's 3 parts. One is the light, the other is the oil, and the third is the wick. And in other parts of Chassidus, they actually look at the lamp itself, the container, but we're not going to deal with that in the Tanya in this chapter. So to be clear, what we're looking at, if I picture in my mind's eye an oil lamp, the wick is actually my physical being, my body, and perhaps my animal soul too, but primarily my body. So the wick is that physical me. I'm here, and there's this something in existence that's able to have a flame attach itself to it. And of course, without the wick, there's also no flame, right? You need a wick to have a flame. We learn what the flame is, and intuitively, many people think, oh, the flame, well, the soul of man is the lamp of God, so the flame must be our soul, right? But in fact, the Alter Rebbe is going to point out later in the chapter, the soul can't be the flame in this case. We'll discuss why later. But counterintuitively, the soul is not the flame. The flame is actually God's presence. The flame is actually godliness. And you might ask, well, isn't the soul an actual piece of God? So isn't that also godliness? Yes, but there's a distinction. Here we're talking about genuine godliness, the dwelling of the Shekhinah, the same sort of phenomenon that we're told happened in the temple, or on holy days when people would come and they'd sense something tangible that's a divine presence. more than just knowing that God is everywhere and the world doesn't exist, but really that being apparent. That's the dwelling of the Shekhinah. That's that light of godliness. That's what the flame represents in this metaphor. So we have two pieces of the metaphor. We have the wick, which is my physical body. We have the flame, which is the dwelling of the Shekhinah. And let's go on and see what the oil is. Ushlomo malka tzavav emar v'shemen al roshka al yichsar.
And thus King Solomon cried out, saying, that there be no lack of oil above your head.
So here's a third quote we're bringing in, that Shlomo HaMelech said, you should always have oil in your head. There should be no lack of oil above your head. And poetically, he could mean, as a ruler, make sure you're always anointed. They actually poured oil over their heads to anoint kings. But here, the Yanuka and the Alter Rebbe are bringing out something else. In this metaphor, what is it that the oil represents? Because I got the wick, I'm alive. I know about the flame and the dwelling of Shekhinah, right? That's something I want to have happen. But now I need oil, and I need oil of a certain quantity and a certain quality to get a constant light and a light of a certain brightness and beauty. So what is this oil that always has to be also over my head? And here's your answer. It's very rare, I'll say, for anyone new, that the Alter Rebbe asks a question and then answers it that particular chapter, right? Some questions we had to wait 20 chapters to get an answer. So you should have a little nachas that he's asking a question and boom, the answer is the next verse. Deha nihora divrosho itz tarich lemishka v'inun ovadan tavan.
For the light over his head requires oil, meaning good deeds. The good deeds that man performs are the oil which supplies the light, illuminating his soul.
Very good. Yeah. So good deeds. That is the third part of our equation. So I've got the wick, which is my body. I've got the light, which is the Shekhinah, and then I've got oil, which in this case is not, as you might guess, chokhmah. Some people often liken chokhmah to oil in Chassidus, but in this case, we're looking at oil as mitzvahs. In particular, the physical mitzvahs that we do, the physical actions, putting $1 into a pushka, blowing the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. And please remind me before I finish, I got my shofar here. Better to hear it in person, but if you haven't, we'll maybe finish off with a little shofar. But those physical mitzvahs, those function as the oil that allows this actual light of Shekhinah, the same dwelling of God that is on a minyan of people praying, or when a baby is born, or holy moments in our lives. That same light can be above my head, as long as I have an abundance of oil always over my head, which is mitzvahs. Now, why? Why are the mitzvahs the oil? Ad kan l'shana, the quotation from the Zohar ends here. V'hineh be'or mashal zeh, shehimshil or hashchina or haner.
And for this reason, the wise man's eyes are in his head, to ensure that he never lacks oil, good deeds for this light.
Did I miss that? Yeah, let me get it sorted. Right? It's that reason that the wise man's eyes are in his head, to make sure that I've always got ample mitzvahs, that oil is always filling up my lamp. Right? If you read the bucket series, everybody know the dipping the bucket kids books that are famous out there. Do you not know there's this series of kids books about this granddad says you all have a bucket above your head, and it's filled with water, and people can put into your bucket or they can dip from your bucket. And when you say something that hurts someone's feelings, you take out from their bucket, and when their bucket's empty, they get upset. And when something good happens, it fills up their bucket. So interesting. That's not the Alter Rebbe's view at all, right? We have self-filling buckets in Chassidus, right? We know everything's from God and everything is good and we're always happy, like we learned in chapter 33. And no one can really dip from my bucket because it's all coming from God. It's all good, even if it looks to my eyes like not good. But our bucket is not a bucket anyone can dip from. It is a container of oil that we ourselves have to fill. And we fill it, as we said, by doing mitzvahs in this case. And a wise man's looking at that and making sure there's enough oil in there of a good quality that this light of the Shekhinah is going to be burning on the wick of their body all the time. So that's where the quotation from the Zohar ends here. And here's the meaning of this analogy, comparing the light of the Shekhinah to the light of the candle. Now we're going to go into it a little deeper about how each of us is this lamp, and each of us has the potential for our lives to be something that the Shekhinah is always dwelling over. She'eno me'ir v'nechaz b'ptila bli shemen.
It does not shed light, nor is it retained by the wick without oil.
Right. So this lamp and this whole system with the light of the Shekhinah, the light is not going to be there, and the flame is not going to stay on the wick if there's no oil there. Right? There's no oil there. The wick just burns up, and there's no sustained light. That's just the fire. That's not light. Right? So oil is a key ingredient, an oil of a certain quality. וכך אין השכינה שורה על גוף האדם שנמשל להפתילה אלא על ידי מעשים טובים דווקא. I think Maxine, is that where we're at?
Similarly, the Shekhinah does not rest upon man's body, which is compared to a wick, except through man's performing good deeds.
So just like we know a fire's not going to stay on a lamp without oil. Who's that? Joey, who's that you're showing me? Hi, how you doing? How you doing? Welcome. So just like the flame of the Shekhinah can't stay on a wick without oil, same thing here in my life. If I want God's actual noticeable presence to be above my head and above my life, I also need an abundance of mitzvot, right? And that here you see we're zoning in on that physical action, because these are just the physical stuff we do, that stuff you think is just nuts and bolts Judaism, and you kind of do it because you do it, and really is it the most meaningful stuff? Maybe, maybe not. The Alter Rebbe is going to show us it's beyond the most meaningful stuff. It's that allows this light of the Shekhinah to continue constantly burning above each of our heads. It
is evident from the shofar, however, that one soul, although a part of God above, is insufficient to serve as oil for the wick.
Ah, so big question, right? Hold on. I learned in chapter 1, my soul, chapter 2, I think that my soul is an actual part of God, a literal part of God. So if my soul is a literal part of God, why can't my soul be the channel and be the oil that serves to allow the Shekhinah to dwell? What do mitzvahs have as an advantage over my soul, which is an actual part of God? A little shaking a lulav and an etrog, it's physical stuff. My soul is spiritual. It's totally connected to God, right? Why can't the soul function as the oil? And the answer is subtle, but very, very important. And that is, even if you were to take not just someone like you and me, but a tzaddik, so a great, great spiritual master whose soul is really just flowing in oneness with God. And if that tzaddik were not in a state just of love like fire, which is the kind of where you're separate from God and you're reaching, you're trying to connect, and there's passion, but the higher level of love, ava betanugim, that we've learned about, this pleasureful love, that's a calm oneness with God, that's experiencing oneness with godliness. Even a tzaddik, even in that state, because there's that level of love, that implies there's someone who's loving. Because an emotion needs to have a subject and an object. Think about it this way. I know that 2 and 2 equals 4, right? Intellectually, I know that. I'm not so excited about it, right? I have no feelings about it. I just know 2 and 2 equals 4. If there were no human being on the planet to understand it, would 2 and 2 stop equaling 4? No. It's not like the tree that falls in the forest. There's no question. 2 and 2 still equals 4, even if there's no sentient being that can actually grasp that intellectual point. 2 and 2 still equals 4. It exists on its own. Now take an emotion. in contrast, I love chess. I've always loved chess, love playing it. Someone offers to play chess, I'll drop everything, right? I love chess. Now, if there were no human beings on the planet and chess hadn't been invented, could you say that love of chess still existed in some way? I mean, that's a stretch, right? It's not the same. An emotion needs to have someone that's feeling the emotion for it to exist. It's subjective. Intellectual things are objective. So the fact that there is a tzaddik who loves God, even at that high level where they're experiencing oneness, that love still needs the subjective being of the tzaddik. If there's the love, then there's the soul of the tzaddik, and it's separate by definition from God. So in fact, it's not that the tzaddik their soul can't function as the oil to allow this light to glow, despite the fact that they're loving God at that level. It's the opposite. Because they're loving God at that level, that means that there's someone who's loving, and now that can't function as the oil because it's not completely one with God. Whereas, and let me set us up for this. So next class when we start, we'll have the concept. A mitzvah, right? The actual when God says, I want you to, what's your favorite mitzvah today? I want you to, blow the shofar, right? That physical mitzvah, blowing the shofar, that is actually what God wants. And so kabbalistically, that's God's keter, right? That's ratzon of godliness. And that is completely united with godliness. We've learned that the sfirot, you can't say that sfirot are separate from the Ein Sof in any way. They're completely united. So even though it looks like it's just a physical shofar, excuse me, and it's contracted so that it becomes physical substance, there's no hester panim, there's no hiding of God's presence in it. And when you use it to blow the shofar, that actually is united with godliness in a way that even the soul of a tzaddik cannot unite. And it's that quality, as we'll learn, of a mitzvah that allows it to serve as the oil that keeps the godly presence flowing above my head. Excuse me, I got a tickle here. And let's finish the page. Mivar movin lechol maskil. And who's reading here? Sorry, does someone remember where we're at? I'll finish. As is clear and understandable to every intelligent person. So the Alter Rebbe is going to go on and say, how is it that even a tzaddik can't serve as the oil, but it really is mitzvahs? Because as we said, mitzvahs are completely united. And we can just pick them up at will. We can just go ahead and go to temple and do a mitzvah and not realize that we're holding ratzon of the Ein Sof. We're holding the kabbalistic highest point of reality. And that's so united with God that can now flow up the wick of my body and allow this flame of the Shekhinah to dwell above my head. Yes, Joey.
So my question is, this really defines the unity between heaven and earth. I mean, we've broken that barrier. I mean, we need these physical things to really attain that level of one with the Shekhinah.
Yes,
right?
that's another piece that a mitzvah accomplishes, that heaven and earth are normally separate, spiritual and physical are separate. A mitzvah takes the physical and lifts it back up into the spiritual, and it integrates the physical and the spiritual, and that's really part of what we're doing here. Yeah, but we want to understand the extent to which it's the physical mitzvah that can do that, because its unity with godliness is beyond even the unity of my soul. It's an amazing flip. And now we take all those little moments of like getting up in the morning and saying the physical Shema and putting a coin into a tzedakah box, even though I needed that money for something else, and building a sukkah, even though it's raining outside, all this physical stuff that we do. And we're saying that it's actually higher than anything else my soul can accomplish. That's the oil that will let this lamp burn. I don't know, if you haven't heard the shofar, Let this be your kind of wind up for the holidays that are coming. This weekend is Slichas, so we're really getting into the spirit of Elul and of Tshuva. So normally you'd stand when you're hearing the shofar. So if you're comfortable standing, go ahead. And also if you're with us on Facebook. And I'll blow, as I've done, three sections. So this is just kind of a wake-up call that gets our whole being, cuts through anything that's in the way, and gets us in a state where we can become these candles, these flames, where the light of the Shekhinah can really burn brightly. And if we can't take a moment, let's sit. Let's continue our long, short path. This is a system of meditation we've been learning. If you look back at chapters 16 and 17, explains how you can join us and what we're doing wherever you are. Just come to a place of neutral stillness. Let your breathing expand. We'll breathe 4 counts to every stage of breath. 4 counts in, 4 counts holding the in, 4 counts out, 4 counts holding the out, starting 1, 2, 3, 4. Keep the breath in, 2, 3, 4, and out, 2, 3, 4. Keeping the breath out, 2, 3. Continue the cycle in, holding there, out, there. As you breathe in, let your belly swell nice and big like a baby. As you breathe out, let your tummy pull back up. As you continue, your body physically relaxes, all kinds of biological positive changes happening from this breathing. Let's open up our wisdom gateway. The end of the in-breath has a space before the beginning of the out-breath. That's our wisdom gateway. Let's put this image of a beautiful oil lamp in our wisdom gateway. We're going to use this meditation for some time. So make yours as gorgeous as you like, wherever you picked it up. Beautiful oil lamp with a beautiful flame. Nice, strong, healthy wick. Let that image fill your mind. Yeah. That warm glow of the lamp creates such beautiful emotions. And this mitzvah we just did of blowing the shofar in Elul, let that be the oil we now pour into our lamp. Clean, pure, refined oil. And just see the light above your lamp growing brighter and whiter. And if it's a small image, perhaps expand it to be a very large image. If the colors aren't so bright, perhaps brighten the colors on your image. Add sound if you like. Know that as we learn Torah and speak with our mouths, as we give tzedakah, as we blow the shofar, this is the oil that will keep the light burning over our heads throughout the day. As we wiggle our toes and fingers and open our eyes. Wonderful, everyone. So good to have you in our class, whether you're with us here or elsewhere or watching in the future, please join us anytime. As I said, email Maya at temple-israel.org to get the link to join us on Zoom. I'm going to have to actually run. We've got services we're going to film, so I'm going to sign off now as we sign out. But wishing everybody a beautiful week and an amazing, amazing rest of Elul. We'll see you for Slichot. We have a Zoom event, and we've got events all week long, and of course, high holidays. We're excited to share with you temple services on YouTube and Facebook and our website, etc. And so God bless. See you guys soon.
Bye.
Thank you, Cantor.
Thank you.